Well, good morning, everybody. I've got a lot packed into today's weather briefing here. We're going to talk about the ice storm that's going through the midsection of the country right now, but then we're going to stretch this out into a bit of a longer-term discussion right away. And what I want to do is ask a question as to how El Niño-like this winter has been so far, and then what we should expect for spring. So we're going to do that. Then I'll come back to what the models are suggesting in terms of the really wet weather in parts of the south, southeast, mid-south, midwest, and east. We'll talk about the jet stream across the west. I'll also be covering the drier spots in North America, including the plains and the prairie. Then what we'll do after this is we're going to look at some disagreement in the models for the rest of February, and then we're going to talk about what I think spring and summer might look like given all the information now being in. And of course, we have some new information on South America at the very end. So feel free to grab that slider bar at the bottom, find the part you want, because today's briefing, I've just got a lot packed in. All right, with that as a setup, you've been staring at a map that is the most important setup map for what we're about to discuss at the beginning. It is the ranks in terms of temperatures from the 11th through the 21st. And why this is so important is because you know how we talked a lot over the last few weeks about antecedent cold air. This is it. So this cold air has been racing through the country between these two kind of bounding lines, and it is the setup right now for the ice storm that's taking place in parts of the Mid-South up to parts of the Midwest, this whole region through here on the risk for ice accumulations today. Now, I am not anticipating the same level of ice we saw last week in parts of the Columbia Basin, Willamette Valley, where, we're continuing to clean up. This will be a months-long process to clean up after the devastation here. And as I mentioned last week, I do believe this will be our nation's first billion-dollar weather disaster of 2024. But as it stands, what we've got at 6 a.m. this morning is a freezing line. So you can see I make a hard break in my colors when I go from 33 to 32, and that's right in through here. So what we've got is a lot of cold air that's in place at the surface. Okay, it's really cold in parts of New England and down here in the southeast. But this cold air that's in place at the surface is being overrun with very mild air aloft. And this morning, just checking it, it appeared that we had above freezing air about a mile above our heads that extended as far north as parts of Iowa, Wisconsin, Michigan. So it's this. This is the high pressure cell that came in over the weekend delivering all the cold air. But once it repositions over the south and east, it's now a pump of heat. Look at that. The back side of it just bringing all that warmer air into aloft. So you get this inversion, right? You have the cold air sandwiched at the surface with warmer air at the top. And as the precipitation falls through it, it's liquid, but the ground is freezing, and you get freezing rain when it makes contact. So let's get a new update on this, This is our latest all hazards weather map this morning. We have a broad area of winter weather advisories, but there's winter storm warnings in parts of in parts of Oklahoma, and then coming out of Arkansas and Missouri, two areas of of ice storm warning. But this whole region in here is going to be on the lookout for some sort of mixed precipitation. It will gradually see an end from the south to north as the warm air pushes up behind this, but there's going to be a while in here that we pick up quite a bit of freezing rain. So winter weather advisories in parts of Washington, Oregon, and northern Idaho, but most of this section here of Montana. And then with the frontal boundary that's coming into the west, we do have quite a bit of moisture with this. So you can see flood watches that are out for this part of California, also Southern California, some wind advisory here, and a winter storm warning for parts of the Sierra Nevada. So let's just take a look at a few of these different pieces. I'm going to start off with the ice side of this. This is this morning's forecast for the probability of getting at least 1/10 of an inch. So you can see that we're in this 80 to 100% range right in through here. If we stepped up to 1/4 of an inch, I just want to make a point how bad 1/4 of an inch of ice is. A 1/4 of an inch of ice coating any sort of surface adds a tremendous amount of weight. And then on top of that, so like I'm thinking like trees and power lines, but on top of that, you put it on the surface, and I don't care how heavy of a vehicle you have, you can't cut through this, and so it makes things very, very slick. We've already heard a lot of accidents down here in Arkansas in the overnight hours. So this will be the primary corridor through which we're most concerned about the risk of accumulating ice that would give us that ice storm warning criteria. We'll watch the National Weather Service all day. So let's go ahead and play the high-res NAM just to keep this idea going. And this is the color shading that I decided to use for ice. Some people, I think, don't like it, but I had to pick a color bar, so that's what I chose. So what we're going to be watching throughout the day today is you see the green representing rain pushing its way north as the more warmer air gets there. But out ahead of it, there's just a long duration freezing drizzle, freezing rain scenario that's going to set up here. That's already to 5 o'clock tonight. So just to take you back over this, if you're getting to watch the video in the morning, let's just start this at 7 a.m. Just keep your eye on this shading here, playing through this afternoon into this evening. Now, what will be interesting to watch is this is the first of multiple disturbances that are coming out around that big high that's sitting here out of the south. And let's just keep our eyes in the Midwest for a moment. As we play into the overnight hours, we'll watch that overrunning kind of take shape right here where there's still a lot of snow on the ground. That's what's up keeping the surface temperatures as cold as they are. And we're going to possibly see the conversion over this to snow, where you see that blue. Very hard forecast for the timing of that. But if I'm sitting here somewhere in northwest Missouri, southern parts of Iowa, central Iowa, getting into eastern Iowa, watch for the conversion pretty quickly there. Same thing for Michigan. This is through early tomorrow morning. So that's just the first impulse. Here comes the second one. Now this one's got more warm air to work with. So you can see it spreads more rain farther to the north. But again, on top of where that snow is, this is where we can have the ice. Why? Because the snow is keeping the lowest levels of the atmosphere right at freezing or a little below. And that's why you get this happening here. Let's play it on out there to Wednesday at midday, and that's what we've got. So heavy rain coming through. You also notice multiple frontal boundaries pushing into the west. Can I go show you those real quick? Let's start off today. So here's why we have the winter storm warnings in the Sierra Nevada, heavy rains in Southern California. They do move into Arizona. Desperately need this moisture in this area. That's just kind of round one for the west. We then play into tomorrow morning, Tuesday, getting out there to midday Tuesday into the Tuesday evening hours. And here comes the next frontal boundary in early Wednesday morning, hitting the west as well. So you can see it's a pretty active time period here across the country. Now, this weekend's snowfall is kind of helping us understand maybe some of the reasoning why we're keeping that surface air so cold, because what was added this weekend is kind of seen right in through this area, a couple of inches of snow, heavier amounts in the Ohio Valley, pretty well predicted by the models. We knew that right up here in parts of West Virginia against the Appalachian Mountains, we were going to get, better than 6 inches. You can see the lake effect as well. And then what's coming over the weekend in terms of snow in the, here in the Cascades and the Sierra Nevada, Northern Rockies. Overall, things have improved since the beginning of the new year with snowpack. We'll take a look at that later this week again. But, we're still not seeing the same kind of snow levels we saw a year ago. Good news is that California is still drought-free. The reservoir health is good in California. We'll look at the Northwest reservoirs later. In spring, they're much more important to look at in spring than they are in the heart of winter. So then we get here. And this will be a map that I think its transition, as we talked about last week, will be critical to soil moisture. Because as that warm air comes in repeatedly this week, we're going to be seeing a lot of this snow beginning to melt. And it's going to help improve the river system. In fact, the Mississippi will come up because of this. We'll also see a lot of this getting soaked into the ground. And this is going to be very important to watch this bit of snow melt that's happening right now. Because when you look back over the last 2 weeks, much of what you've got right in through here fell in terms of snow, but you look at the liquid equivalent of it, and we're at 300+% of normal. That's 3 times what's normally falling in this area. So got to see how this improves things. Now, what I want to talk about here, now that we've kind of got this established, is I'm going to ask how El Niño-like has November, December, January been? And I specifically want you to think about these drier areas here. And I know that looks like it's been wet in Montana, but honestly, this is just from the recent snow. What about the Northern Plains, Upper Midwest, Canadian Prairie? And what about being wet here, wet there, and then wet up the East Coast? How El Niño-like is that? Because we can also look at it in terms of snow. If you're curious what your season-state snowfall totals look like, this is what they are. And I often find it easier to look at this in terms of a percent of average. So through January 21st, so this isn't compared to the end of the year, it's through January 21st, what you've got here is your season-to-date percent of normal snow. And it is vastly different from a year ago, right? Where all of this whole region was just packed in with snow. And we didn't have much here and much in New England. So I just find these maps very intuitive, especially when you compare them to a year ago. But the one thing I'm watching is all of the excess snowfall that's been in through here and the rainfall and then the snow down in the Mid-South. As that melts, how much more does this map change for the rest of January? And then what does it look like by the time I get into March? What we are attempting to do this winter and spring is recharge a deficit that's taken in some locations here 2 years and in other locations like Iowa, Kansas, Nebraska, Missouri, up to 4 years to develop. So this needs to be recharged just to kind of put, money in the bank. It's that soil moisture that's there should we get into a spring and summer that are problematic. And in this video, these slides over here are all about what this upcoming spring and summer could look like now that we've got all that data in. Just taking a quick look at our drought monitor. Again, we talked about this on Friday, but where I'm expecting to see major improvement is going to be down here in the delta, the south, this part of the mid-south, as the jet stream just slides into the west, but allows a big ridge to sit over parts of the southeast, just pumping in the moisture into this area. So with all that as a setup, I know we kind of covered a lot of just quick hit topics there. Let me get into my big questions now. We want to know how El Niño-like has this winter been. Now we know that El Nino has hit its peak and it's starting to fade. That was one thing we kind of got right on the timing. And what I'm going to talk about is this. As this fades, we need to watch the North Atlantic temperatures, especially in through here for the hurricane season. And we're going to watch the colder water that could be here or could be here. Now we call this region, it's kind of a target area to watch for something called the negative phase of the Pacific Decadal Oscillation. It's more than just that area, but we can keep an eye on one spot just as a good benchmark. This area down here is called the Pacific Meridional Mode area, and if it stays negative and cold, that's important. So what needs to be monitored, because this is the only preseason predictor, you hear that? It's the only preseason predictor we've got in January to tell you about late spring and summer weather, is the speed at which El Nino collapses and what happens to these temperatures here in combination with this part of the Atlantic. Okay, so let's just remember that. So what I do, I showed you this last week, is I go to Tropical Tidbits. I love this website. I clicked on Analysis Tools. We continue to see the 7-day change, right? Continues to see some cooler water here, which means El Nino was at its peak right around Christmas and the first week of the new year, and it continues to kind of slowly fade. Now, I've made a case that the speed at which this fades, because it's the undercurrent of all the other weather patterns, it will be critical to the upcoming long-range forecast, because all of our spring and summer forecasts that are available to us in January are based upon these ocean temperature patterns. That's the dominant factor going into them. All right, so if you were to just go Google El Nino and winter, this is what you would get. This comes from NOAA. They took all those El Nino years that we've had during winter, and they made a composite map out of what typically happens. You get a really highly variable polar jet that kind of runs over the top. Remember that northwest flow, extended at times, subtropical jet that skirts along the south. We have had that, but it's typically mild here, wet from Southern California through Texas and up the southeast into the East Coast, and we're drier in this area, right? That's what typical El Nino means. Now, did we have typical El Nino November, December, and most of January? Because the models forecast, take a look at this. This is what the European model forecast that time frame to look like. So they forecast this area drier even back into Texas and maybe a little bit up the plains, but wetter across the west coast and wet south and east, right? They even had a little bit of a wetter stripe here in parts of the Great Lakes states. That was the European model solution. This was the NMME, the National Multi-Model Ensemble, a suite of 7 different models all stuffed together here, producing a November, December, January forecast. Now we're almost done with this. So we want to know, how close did the models get? So European, National Multi-Model Ensemble, and this is reality. So from November 1 up until the 21st, yeah, it was drier in through here. Maybe there was a miss in the Great Lakes states, but we were wet in the southeast up the East Coast. It was maybe a miss down here in California because we've not yet seen this subtropical jet just deliver huge amounts of moisture here. But overall, could you say there was a bit of a drier bit up the plains? Maybe, especially here in the northern plains. I can't necessarily give it a bad grade on the forecast model, especially from the European. I think it did okay. Now, I bring that up because I'm going to show it to you again at the end of this. And I'm telling you, I think the European model had a good handle on this El Nino. Now, the temperature side of it, if you look, okay, there are some parts of this it did get right. We're usually cooler south, warmer north. But remember, much of what you're seeing here, October, November, and then through the first 21 days, December, and then, I got that wrong. This is November, December, and the first 21 days of January. Most of the warm that you've got in this area was from, December. I mean, that was what December's precipitation ranks by climate district look like, right? So just stuff this in the back of your head for a moment, because I could make a case that this winter is behaving, pretty close to what we would expect from a climatologically normal El Nino event. Certainly not a super Nino, but the fact that January's temperatures plummeted after this, that's pretty common as well. Now, here's the question. I just gave you that as a setup because do you remember what gave us that warm December? An extended Pacific jet stream. Because what extended Pacific jet streams do is they get to the west coast of the United States and then they do this. Look at that. Through the next, week or so, massive jet extension, split. Now, what does a split do? When we split the flow, we just leave ridging in the midsection of the country. Mild air that extends in the Canadian prairie. The cold air goes back to Alaska and Greenland. My very last point in my video today will be when we think about what could transition after the first week of February, you need to be watching Alaska and Greenland. And the reason for that is just like in December, the Pacific jet extends and then it will retract. And what we have out here is right around Groundhog's Day, as the jet stream comes just flying in and skirts down here across the south, this ridge is in place. The cold air will be here. The cold air will be there. And this ridge comes out, and I bet, now this is a long way out, but I bet because of northwest flow, we're going to wake up to a pretty clear morning and a mild morning. Now, what's the point of this? Okay, I know the Groundhog's Day is just for the fun of it. It has no merit. But what will be interesting to hear discussed among all of us meteorologists on that day is when does the cold air come back? Because as we get out here, watch this, the 3rd, the 4th, and the 5th, the jet retracts. And what I want to know is, does that start to shift? Can you even see the faint lines here? Does that shift our flow to be coming back out of the southwest? Because when that occurs, you get large lows that form in the midsection of the country, and on their backside, they start to make this pull on that Arctic air. And that's the setup. Remember, we had 2 big winter storms, one of which was a blizzard, that set up the arrival of the really cold air we've had for the last, 7 or 8 days. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and just put a timestamp on it. I think that from February 2nd to February 5th will be the time when we start to get a transition in this pattern. Now, until then, we've got mild air for the next 5 days. Where's all the cold? Alaska, Greenland. This is day 5 through 10, very mild across the Canadian prairie compared to average, mild across North America. Where's the cold air? Alaska, Greenland. And then this is day 10 through 15. Where's the cold air? Alaska and Greenland. This is a lot of mild Pacific air flooding into the country with no support from the Atlantic to drop in cold air. So we're just going to go back over very mild for a while, and that's why I kept telling you all week last week about the melting of that snow and its recharging of the subsurface soil moisture. All right, what about precip? Well, we have good flow coming into the west, okay, but it's primarily along the coast, and we have a big ridge that's going to pump multiple systems this week out of the Gulf, delivering a lot of rain. The reason this region right in through here is missing is because the Pacific jet is staying pretty far to the south, or it's coming in here and curling up. We are not getting troughs that come over the Rocky Mountains until we get out there past February 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th. So this whole region will look at a drier overall time period to continue for at least the next 10 to 15 plus days, drier than average. Now, it doesn't mean we don't get late season moisture. No. I'm just the next 10 to 15 days is what I'm concerned about. So let's go and have a look at the models. The GFS on the left, European on the right. We've already watched the high-res NAM play through this point. So let's just pick it up here. Here comes the second kind of pulse of moisture. These are not deep lows. They're primarily just a pressure trough that's going to live in this area, because at multiple times this week, high pressure moves in this direction. There's high pressure sitting here, and just the flow kind of sandwiches in the middle. We talked about that a lot last week. So this is now looking at Wednesday morning, getting through the day on Wednesday, playing out there through Thursday, going through the day on Friday when the heaviest rains move into the southeast. And then we try to see the models this weekend deliver another system, maybe through part of the south and mid-south here. And we just play it into early next week and things calm down a bit. And the reason they do that is because the jet stream comes up, goes up into a large ridge and down like this. So we just leave this whole area out of the flow early next week, and that's why we get into a bit of a calmer time period then. Can the West continue to see a few more coastal systems? Yeah, I do see that. But can you watch this again with me, just kind of all in aggregate? Let's just pick it up right here where the NAM left off. And here we go through Thursday into Friday, and Saturday, playing into Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday of next week. That's what we've got set up in this pattern. So let's go ahead and add it all up to kind of see where we are in terms of precip. High-res European model playing through Thursday into Friday when that rain spreads really into the southeast. And what I've got is a 7-day total where we could have parts of Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Arkansas, Oklahoma. I mean, there's a big section here that could easily pick up 2 to 4 inches of rain. Heavy rains in the southeast. Remember, today on the northern side of this, a lot of freezing rain in this area, but we're going to flip it all over to rain soon. And it's pretty heavy rain. I mean, look at this 2-inch color right in through here. The west, it's primarily a coastal event. Notice it just tapers as you get into the interior, and we see this whole region in here currently being forecast by the models as dry, like nothing. If we compare this to the GFS, very similar outlook. European, GFS, they come into better alignment, not on totals in the west, but a better alignment on the heavier rains in the south. And if you're curious about the snow, I'm just going to show you the ECMWF as kind of an idea on where we could get some snow this week. And what I am watching is that on the very northern side, remember, in parts of Iowa, Wisconsin, Michigan, where that snow already sits, we could see some decent snows here, maybe getting rid of this part of Ontario as well. But yeah, that's the overall idea. These are not big snow events in the west. We just don't have the coldest air in place to really pack it in with strong onshore flow. Now, let's go ahead and look at those ensemble maps. This is the probability of getting less than a ½ inch. In fact, we can even make this look a bit worse, unfortunately. If I show you the probability over the next 10 days of less than 1/10 of an inch, there's a 90 to 100% chance that this area and through here does not receive any moisture at all. On the flip side, the wetter places are down here across, this whole area of the mid-south, south, Ohio Valley, southeast, east coast. This whole region is expected to see a lot of rainfall in coastal parts of California, Washington, and Oregon here. If we step it up to 2 inches, let's go up to 4. So currently the models are very aggressive with flooding rains here. And how about 8, just to look at where we could be really, really wet. So maybe let's go back to 4 as our benchmark. Now what happens after this? Okay, let's just come back to that idea one more time. Once I get out there, this is the 31st, the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th. Now watch. This whole setup here in the Gulf of Alaska, the Bering Sea, Alaska, the North of the Pacific, is trying to get the turn to happen. As this ridge, if it moved any farther here toward the Canadian Maritimes, we would be setting ourselves up with an extremely active pattern east of the Rockies and strong onshore flow on the road. So what I'm trying to say is get past February 2nd, 3rd. As we get out there the 4th, 5th, and 6th, there's really good indications of a significant pattern change. Now that's out there at the very tail end of next week, week 2. So that's why you still see in all of our major model forecasts drier in this area, because we're going to build a ridge. Northwest flow in winter is drier. So drier, 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 but the west is our setup. And the CPC's forecast here, or NOAA's forecast here, looking at how wet things could be, I think it's pretty robust and pretty solid forecast for them. All right, what about temperatures? Frost extent. We're finally pulling back the frost extent. See this whole area down here now no longer worrying about frost. We just had a frost this morning here, but the west coast going over mild, and as you already saw, I bet you know what these temperatures are going to do. Here's Monday's highs. There's our risky area for freezing rain. Look at that, just barely below freezing. But as we go forward into Tuesday, much more mild. Watch Wednesday, Thursday. Look how warm this is. So we have places in through here that are going to experience almost, given how cold things were last week at times, we're looking at 80 to 90 degree swing in temperatures. And this is Friday, getting into Saturday and Sunday. Very, very mild air. And just to complement the GFS forecast I gave you earlier, sliding out there today 5 through 10, where's the cold air? Here and here. And going day 10 through 15, still not dislodged. It's after that time period, February 2nd through the 7th, that I think things really start to transition. Some of the support for that comes from the forecast of the MJO. And the MJO is right now hanging out over here in the warmer phase. This is in phase 5 today. And what we're concerned about is, does it do one of two things? If the MJO comes screaming out and makes it all the way into phase 8 and 1, which is a possibility, then we bring in the cold fast. If it hangs out here a while, that's going to push us toward a later time period, maybe after the 7th before the colder air gets here. The models don't agree on this. In fact, you know what the GFS does? The GFS just dumps it back into null space, at least the extended forecast does. So whichever one wins out, the European versus the GFS, will tell us how this whole thing is going to transition. So what do we have? Let's look at the precipitation side of this, because I do not think the models are capable of telling us the transition on temperature. But this is what they've got from January 25th to February 25th. And about the only area they really agree on, the GFS versus the European, is I'd say down here in the southeast, keeping it wet. Notice the difference. Watch this. This is the GFS extended forecast for California with the MJO collapsing. The European, which extends the MJO, is bringing in much wetter conditions. You can also see how in early February we may finally get that southwest flow coming over the Rockies, giving us some lee cyclogenesis and wetter conditions here. And I wouldn't keep this area dry if we start to build big lows right in this area. They'll get over into this spot, which means I think February is going to be an active one for us. I really do. I think it's going to be an active for the whole of the country. Now, we talked about this last week. Let's kind of build our longer range story. We'll talk about South America, and I promise I will wrap this video up. What we've got here is El Nino set to collapse by spring from NOAA, and then rapid onset of La Nina. And remember, when you compare models, the CFSV2, which already has this past peak, right, is expecting the average ocean temperatures out there in the middle of the equatorial Pacific to make it fully into La Nina territory July through October. And not just fully into it, but like 1.5 degrees to 2 degrees cooler. That's as strong as an El Nino we have right now. They're expecting it to be La Nina, that same strength by the time we get into summer. Now, the European system, their forecasting is expecting to have a much slower demise of El Nino. And we've made a case for what that could mean going forward. So here we go. February, March, and April. Right now, the European model, which I could argue was the better performer for November, December, January, has better moisture in the plains, wet across the south. It's running the risk of going back over drier in the northwest. Is that being supported by our governmental forecast? We looked at this. Well, that's March, April, May. Let's go February, March, and April. Yeah, kind of a similar outlook. They're even a little bit drier in the Ohio Valley. So I look at that, I look at the Euro, and I start to see some similarities, don't you? But then we want to step it forward. What about March, April, May? Let's now go back to this and go to March, April, May. And we kind of see, again, if there's maybe a drier signal, is it the northwest? That doesn't make full sense to me. I don't think that's the way we finish out the wet season in the northwest, but it is there in the 3-month outlook from our government. Now let's go one more step with the European, actually 2 more. There's April, May, June into May, June, July. And what I want you to see when we do that is that the model is trying to give us our first emergence of drier weather on the lee side of the Rockies. In other words, an extended rain shadow this spring. So if we go from March, April, May to April, May, June, do you see a similar thing trying to connect here? And then this is, how about May, June, July? There it is. So wet east, drier as you go west in the plains, according to the models right now. Now, I looked at all that and I said, well, how does it compare to history? So we're going to look at March, April, May analogs and then June through September analogs. And what we see is in both the forecast models and the analogs, we're wetter here. And we tended to see tighter planting windows here, drier in the northwest. Did you see that? It was in the forecast model as well. But then when you get into June to September, what I am most worried about is this region going over drier first. A lot of times following an El Nino, we tend to have ridging farther to the south. Some years it's over the south and southwest. Some years it's over the southeast. I don't know where it's going to be because it's kind of split 50-50. But either way, if you keep ridging to the south here or here, storms run over the top of it. And that's the current thinking I've got for the longer range. Just using history as a guide here and then the models as a guide, which you just saw. I think what ultimately determines the success of any of those forecasts is understanding the undercurrent, which is El Nino, and the pace at which it fades. So this is what I've got in terms of my analog years, all right? How about a global perspective on things? We're going to talk about South America next, but I want to let you know a big storm system just rolled through Europe. Very windy conditions, drier in parts of France, Spain, Portugal, Italy going forward. South Africa went back over dry. Southern Africa, forgive me, and then South Africa did as well. We have two tropical systems. There's one here going into Western Australia. There's one here going into Eastern Australia right now. You say, well, why? Well, the MJO is sitting here in phase 5, and that's just supporting the tropical thunderstorm development in that area. Well, what I want to talk about is South America. And I want to preface what you're about to see with reminding you that southern Brazil, Paraguay, Uruguay, and Argentina's growing areas for the next 10 days are cool. Because when you look at the forecast, watch it add up here. We're not expecting much, if anything. They have cool, high pressure in place. So the dry conditions you're going to see in the forecast is not alarming for this area. It's just like cooler weather in late summer. Not a problem. But the wetter conditions to the north, we've been questioning for the last 2 weeks. How wet is it and how long does it stay wet? Right? Because we right now look out there with the models from now till February 20th, and maybe just go beyond that. Look at this. Well, this is a 30-day sliding window. We continue to see the models attempting to put down a wetter than average corridor in through here. Now remember, this is the Amazon. We're not growing, well, there's trees growing up here, but we're not growing crops. What the question is how wet does this actually stay? Because if it stays wet, it'll slow progress with harvest. Note, too, that the models bring back normal rains into Argentina. Argentina's going to have a massive crop this year. And the drier conditions in southern Brazil, I don't see this yet being an issue because it's still expecting to get moisture there, just drier than average. But they've been so wet, I don't see this as being a problem. So that is my top question still. How long into February, as we make progress with harvesting one crop and planting another, does it stay like this? Because you know we're worried about April and May as being an early drop-off of the monsoon. We talked about that last week. So here's my last thing for you today. You need to remember this. For North America, watch Alaska, watch Greenland. Those are going to be our symptoms, the clues. When the pattern changes here, it's going to change here next. That's what I want to keep an eye on going forward. I know we covered a lot today, but some of you, I don't know, my kids got the day off of school. Well, no, they didn't. They got an e-learning day. Snow days are a thing of the past now, but because of the ice, so maybe you'll have some extra time to watch this with me today. But that's the big story I've got. Appreciate it. We'll talk soon. Thanks.